Hello class and welcome to our video lecture on figurative language. When you use figures of speech, you figure one thing in terms of another for emphasis. So let's start with allusion. An allusion is a reference. You compare one thing to another, and usually the allusion is to something popular or famous, whether it's a person, place, thing, or an idea, for emphasis. An analogy, right, is when you compare two things, right, and you explain one thing in terms of another. Now, usually what you're explaining is unfamiliar to your readers, and what you're comparing it to, right, is familiar. So you're saying, okay, I'm going to make an analogy between this thing that you understand and this thing that you don't, this idea that you don't understand, so you can better understand it. Again, an analogy is for emphasis. Comparing two things, often point by point to show similarities, right? Antonomasia, right? We're going in alphabetical order here. Antonomasia is when you substitute a idea, title, or nickname for someone's actual name. Again, for emphasis, if you call someone a Romeo, right? Or you call someone a jerk, or you call someone professor, right? You call someone professor, it's more formal. You call someone a Romeo, you're emphasizing that they fall in love too easily. And if you call someone a jerk, you're emphasizing that aspect of their personality. So whenever you substitute a nickname, a title, or an idea for someone's name, we call that figure of speech antonomasia, and you're doing that substitution for emphasis. Hyperbole is when you emphasize exaggeration excessively, right? I'm so hungry, I could eat a horse. Again, you're using that description to emphasize how hungry you are. But again, you're figuring one thing in terms of another. You're the worst ever. Oh my God, this is the greatest burger I've ever had in my entire life. Now, if you mean it literally, then it is. But if you're using hyperbole, it's a figure of speech to emphasize. Irony is when either verbal or dramatic irony, either what is said is the opposite of what is intended for emphasis, or what happens, dramatic irony, is the opposite of what was expected. Um, so again, when people use irony and they're bitter or a little bit angry, we call that sarcasm. It's a form of irony when one is kind of bitter or angry or derisive. Um, Metaphor, when you compare one thing in terms of another, but you don't say like or as. If you use like or as, that is a simile, right? Uh, so usually analogies start with either a simile or a metaphor, right? Writing is like therapy. Okay, that's a simile. If you were to say writing is therapeutic, that would be a metaphor. And then the analogy would compare how writing is like going to a therapist point by point. So an analogy starts with a metaphor or a simile, right? And then when you make the point by point comparison in the analogy to explain it in detail, right? But the metaphor, the simile, right, is the statement that initially starts the comparison. Metonymy. So if you substitute a word or an idea for emphasis, right, we call that metonymy. Antonomasia is when you substitute a word or an idea or a title for someone's name. Metonymy is when you substitute a word or an idea for emphasis, and it's not necessarily a person's name, right? Um, if you call someone green, right, that could mean that they're sick, right? Or it could mean that they're environmentally friendly. And right, if you're emphasizing that they're sick, it's because their skin kind of takes on a greenish hue when people get sick. If you're emphasizing that they're environmentally friendly, right, green is the color of plants in nature. Or you might even be emphasizing that they're envious, right? That expression green with envy. Or you might be emphasizing that they're innocent. If you say someone's green around the ears, they're naive. So there's a lot of different um, things that can be emphasized when we use metonymy depending on the word that you substitute for what is intended. Again, it's all about emphasis. An oxymoron, right, is when you put two words together, right, to make an idea that's contradictory. If you say something's bittersweet or a happy accident, again, it's used for emphasis. A rhetorical question is when you ask a question that's not meant to be answered per se, it's meant to generate interest and thought on a topic or a subject. And again, emphasizing that you want the person to reflect on that. Understatement. Understatement is the opposite of hyperbole, right? Hyperbole is when you use excessive exaggeration to emphasize, to make a point. Understatement is when you say less, right? It's a form of emphasis that's the opposite of hyperbole, right? If you win, American Idol, and somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, how'd you do?" and you said, "Oh, I did okay," that would be an understatement. You won the whole competition and the prize money and all of that. Usually, when people, right, sometimes hyperbole can almost come across, right, with that excessive exaggeration for emphasis. Understatement is the opposite. And usually when people are very humble, right, and they express their humility, or they demonstrate their humility, right, a lot of times they're using understatement. So thank you for your attention. Uh, and let me know if you have any questions. Hopefully you can use these figures of speech um, in your writing, maybe in your titles for your essays. Ooh, you know how I like a figure of speech in the title. But yeah, try to use them for emphasis in your writing.